Welcome to AskReddit Stories, where I bring you the most amazing stories from all of Reddit. Sit back, relax, and let's dive right in. What is the scariest story you know that is 100% true? My mom's friend had a small house and lived alone. She constantly noticed weird things: a batch of soup depleting faster than usual, missing eggs, damp towels in the hamper when she hadn't used any, extra dishes in the dishwasher, etc. This went on for months. She thought she was just being forgetful. One day, she heard some thumping around in her attic and went to investigate. She found some makeshift living quarters, a small radio, a hot plate, sleeping bag, pillow, food wrappers, etc. She called the cops, who came to keep an eye on the place. They ended up catching a homeless man climbing a tree trying to sneak into her attic window. He had been doing this almost daily. He would wait for her to go to work, then go downstairs and help himself to food and amenities. The funny part about the story is that they got to know each other throughout this ordeal, and the guy was actually very respectful, just down on his luck. She decided not to press charges. Instead, she let him move in, helped him get a job, and let him live in the attic until he got back on his feet. My friend's boss bought an Audi A4 convertible back when they were new and interesting. One of the talking points was the pop-up roll hoops that were hidden unless you rolled it. A few months after buying it, he got to test those roll hoops out when he lost control and rolled down a steep bank about 10 meters deep. The roll hoops did their job, and he survived with just cuts and scratches from the bushes he'd plowed through. The car ended up right side up, so he got out and walked back up the bank to the side of the road. He got on the phone with the police to report the accident. While he was standing there, a driver from a car that had seen the accident came over to speak to him. Approaching from behind, the other driver asked if he was okay. My friend's boss turned around to reply and dropped dead. His neck had been fractured, but it was in one piece right up until the moment he turned his head, when it severed his spinal cord. I'm a plumber, and someone who worked for my company died on the job about 7 years ago. He went on a service call and ended up having to grind out some old cast iron pipe and replace it with PVC. The homeowner neglected to mention he makes fireworks in his spare time and had a faint barrel of gunpowder in the same room as the pipe. When my coworker started grinding down the pipe, sparks went flying and some landed on the gunpowder. Both were found dead a couple hours later. Many years ago, before there were cell phones, we had these things called pagers strapped to our hips. Someone would page you with their phone number, and you would call them back when you got to a phone. As an on-call technician working in the audio-visual field, my pager would go off all the fucking time. Like most people who used pagers, our clients knew that if you followed up your number with a 911, that would indicate to the technician to stop what they were doing and call right away. Although I was always busy, I rarely, if ever, got 911s. One afternoon, while traveling from Orlando to St. Petersburg via Interstate 4, my pager goes off with a number I don't recognize, followed by a 911. I find the first exit and pull into a little truck stop to use the payphone. This takes maybe 3 minutes tops. I walk in, ask for some change, and head to the wall where there are 4 payphones to choose from. I pop my quarter in and dial the number displayed on my pager. It rings, and rings, and rings, and rings. I'm thinking to myself, WTF, who would page me with a 911 and not answer their phone? Just then, I notice another ringing sound in addition to the one in my ear. I pull the handset from my ear, and 2 phones over, another payphone is ringing, but with an incoming call. I hang up my payphone and the ringing stops on the other phone. I walk over to the other phone, pick it up, and look at the phone number printed above the buttons. I look at the number on my pager and realize that they're identical. I lose my breath for a second, and then I make my way over to the girl at the counter and ask if she saw anyone use the payphone. She said I was the only person in the store in the last hour. The whole episode probably took 15 minutes, but man, I was freaked out. The hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up, and I just wanted to get out of there. I got about 10 miles down the highway and came upon a scene that looked like a bomb went off. There's a 4-car pile involving a tractor trailer hauling a load of steel that had come loose. State troopers and paramedics had just arrived. I pulled over to the side and helped the best I could, but it was all pretty much over once it began. I have no idea why I got that page or from whom, but I'm convinced that if I hadn't, I would not be alive to write this today. In 3rd grade, a guy came to our school and held our class hostage. He had already killed his wife and was there to kill his kid. The administrators convinced him the kid was not there and to take one of their cars and leave. After threatening to kill us multiple times, tying up the gym teacher, and dragging someone's grandma around with a knife at her neck, he finally left about 30 minutes later. The police caught him in Indiana on his way to kill his parents. He was convinced the world was ending and he was killing everyone he loved to spare them. The school did worse than nothing. They lied to parents and no assistance was ever given to either the kids or teachers involved. In the 70s, the Chicago public school system was more concerned about their jobs and all the lawsuits, so they covered all of it up. Back in 2006, I was working inside of a multi-story car park. I came down in the elevator from the top floor where I was working at the time. As I got out of the elevator, there was a woman in her late 40s. She was holding a maroon handbag. We brushed shoulders as I got out of the elevator. I apologized. She gave me a very blank look. I walked out to go get some food, not thinking anything of it. Although, now that I think about it, the lady appeared to look quite sad. I returned with my noodles around 20 to 30 minutes later. There were police everywhere. The lady had jumped from the top floor. I knew it was her as soon as I saw the maroon handbag laying on the floor. A friend of a friend knew someone who died in a freak accident. He was in a minivan that had one of those back seats that you can push backward to lay flat in the trunk for extra storage space. He went to grab something from the trunk, leaning over the seat, and it tipped backward and pinned him upside down against the back of the car in a position such that he couldn't get himself out. He called the police twice. The second time he called and gave them a very clear description of the car. He desperately pleaded for help but couldn't hear the dispatcher because he was far away from the phone. Apparently the information didn't get relayed to the officers at the scene. His final words were him telling the dispatcher to tell my mom I love her. When I was 8, my family lived in a large house on the edge of a small town. The school district was in the middle of a big reconstruction, so even though we were only a couple grades apart, my brother and I went to different schools and took different buses. This left me as the last person to leave in the morning and the first person to get home in the afternoon. This meant it was my job to make sure all the lights were off and the door was locked. One morning, I noticed the basement door was open and the light was on, so before I left, I turned off the light and closed the door. When I got home that afternoon, the light was on and the door was open again. I just assumed that I'd forgotten to actually take care of it when I noticed it in the morning, so I went over to turn off the light and close the door. When I got to the top of the basement stairs, I looked and there was a large shadowy male figure towards the bottom of the staircase. I freaked out, slammed the door, and pushed a bunch of boxes against it, and then went and hid in my closet. For months, I didn't tell my family because I was positive that what I had seen was a ghost, and I didn't think anyone would believe me. Then, about a year after that incident, my mom and her boyfriend realized that small amounts of money had been going missing for months. So we all walked around the house with flashlights, trying to figure out how someone could have gotten in. Turns out some homeless guy was climbing in through a small hole in the outside of the house, shimmying through a crawl space, and then coming up into the house through the basement. Realizing I had been alone in the house with him on at least one occasion was one of the worst, most terrifying moments I've ever had. My friend once tripped and fell onto train tracks, landing face first onto the third rail. For those who don't know, the third rail is used to supply electricity to the train. We stood there in absolute shock because we thought he was dead, but then he said, "Can I move? Will I be electrocuted?" We told him to move instantly and he did. We got him off the tracks, and no more than 2 minutes later, a train went zipping by. The third rail must have turned on just seconds after his face came off of it. I was responsible for opening a new office for a previous employer. The receptionist that we hired was the sweet little old lady who would always bring in cookies and brownies. She said her husband has a sweet tooth and she doesn't know how to make just enough for the two of them, and since the kids all moved out, she always baked too many. She would always tell us funny stories about what her husband said or did the night before. He sounded like a fun guy and she was the absolute sweetest little old lady. Or so I thought. A few months later, her husband was reported missing by her adult kids. They said that he hadn't called them since Christmas and that their mom was very evasive when they would ask to talk to him on the phone. After a little investigating, the police found the husband hacked to pieces in the sweet little old lady's trunk. It turns out on Christmas night, she slit his throat in his sleep, used a hacksaw to cut him up, rolled all the pieces up in a carpet, and tucked him into her trunk. Here's the creepy part. We hired her in June. They found the body in August. The whole time I knew her, his body was wrapped in a carpet in her trunk. She was bringing in cookies and telling us funny husband stories, all the while he was decaying in her trunk. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and if you want to see more, consider subscribing. See you next time.